Always trust.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Njemački historičar, novinar i autor knjige Srebrenica, hronologija jednog genocida. O negiranju genocida u Bosni i Hercegovini, muralima u Beogradu, veličanju ratnih zločinaca, te akademskom izučavanju holokausta u Evropi, za Al Jazeeru govori Matthias Fink.
Mr. Fink, hello and welcome to the Al Jazeera Balkans channel. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Now, quite a number of books have been written about the Bosnian genocide. Your book now has been translated into the Bosnian language. Could you explain to our viewers why is it important after all these years to continue writing, analyzing, discussing and memorializing the Bosnian genocide committed in Srebrenica?
You see, first, thank you for having me in your show. The truth has come out by the trials in The Hague because of the documents we got, because of the witnesses we got. So the books which were written just after the war, they were very correct in some sense, but now you got more and more content of what really happened by the tribunal in The Hague. And this tribunal made it possible that you, as a user, you can look into all the documents which were presented in the various trials. So you can find orders, you can find written laws, you can find directives by the government, and you can find all the witnesses. And this makes it possible to broaden the aspects of what was involved in Srebrenica as well as in other cases. So The Hague, it's often criticized for what it did, but in that respect, it really is a source which will last forever, and the proof, the evidence is there, and everybody who will specialize or work on some subject concerning Bosnia and Herzegovina in the years of the war, they will have this source, which is fundamentally.
But do you think this genocide will still continue to be researched in the years ahead of us?
You know, there is a discussion going on if it's a genocide or not. For instance, one of the judges, a German judge in one of the trials, he said in an interview, in one of the trials concerning the Srebrenica officers from the Vojska Republika Srpske, he in an interview said it's not so important if we describe it judicially as a genocide or not. What we do is bring the evidence out and show the people what had happened. So this discussion is still going on. Was it genocide or was it not genocide? What is genocide in general? What can we consider as a genocide? If you take the case of the Srebrenica men, you had this column of 15,000 men fleeing the city and the općina of Srebrenica towards Tuzla, and the first 7,000 made it, more or less. And the 8,000 from behind were caught and killed. So is it a genocide when 7,000 make it and 8,000 get killed? Of course it is a genocide, because these people just were killed because they were Bosniaks from Srebrenica. That was the only reason why they were killed. They were not armed, they had nothing on them. So of course it was genocide, but you always will have these kind of judicial discussions, and this, I think, will be going on. But the proof is there, and this is so important. the proof is there, and if you call it a mass massacre, or if you call it a genocide, this has a political expression. But to describe what has happened, it's not so important.
Was there any particular family or family's destiny that personally touched you while researching this book?
Yes. Yes. I met in a refugee camp in Munich, at the outskirts of Munich, very shabby camp, a woman and her daughter who were from Srebrenica. And they came to Germany and lived there and didn't know anything about the husband of her and her son. The son was 14, and he was taken from her at Potocari, where the Bosnian Serb soldiers selected the men and the young boys from the women and the old people. And she was missing him, and her husband as well. And she asked me, well, Matthias, why should I talk to you? And I said, people have to know your story, because if you don't talk, people will never know your story and what happened there. And she said, does it help me to find my son? And I said, I don't know, perhaps. And I promise you, I will do everything what I can to find your son. And then she gave me the interview. And from that moment on, because of that promise, the fate of this family never left me. I went to Bosnia. I had a good colleague here from Sarajevo, and she and me, we went out there in the most strange situations to find Mirnes Osmanovic. That was his name, Mirnes Osmanovic. Mass graves, Kameničko Birto. He was never found until 2012. He was identified in a mass grave found near Zvornik in the Kamenica Valley, and then he was buried. And there, my story with Srebrenica more or less ends. And that was the point when I closed my book. And for me, it was important. It was always important, my whole journalistic life, to describe unbelievable things by taking a person as an example for it. So we have this family, which is an example for what happened to thousands of families of Srebrenica. We have a Jewish family, survivors of the Shoah, and with that family history, you can describe what had happened, let's say, in Munich in 1941. And so I can describe this. We know 8,372 people are killed in Srebrenica or around Srebrenica after the fall of the city. This is a figure, it's just a figure, 8,372, not more. But if you take one out of them, there is this famous scene where Ramo, a Bosnian prisoner, has to yell for his son Nermin, who is up in the hills. And the Serb soldiers, make him, force him, call for him to come down. And this man standing there. So you don't need more to describe what meant this situation. Just look in the face of this father who is forced to call for his men, and you can see that he knows what kind of destiny is waiting for him.
But now, I mean, as you speak, the last couple of days, we've seen a mural of General Ratko Mladic, convicted for genocide, spray painted on a wall in downtown Belgrade. This created some reactions from Serbia's non-governmental sector, and a number of activists tried to remove that painting. However, it was in the end protected by members of the Serbian Ministry of Interior. What does that tell you about the state of Serbian society today? What is it? I mean, how do you make sense of the glorification of a war criminal?
We have now 76 years after the end of the Second World War. And in Germany, there are still people who hail German war criminals, who hail certain days of the Nazi regimes. And I think in connection to genocide, there will always be people who deny it, and people, and probably the majority, will say, why do you deny it? We have the proof. In case of Serbia, I think it's something special because after the war, when the war ended, there was no remorse, no nothing. We know that Biljana Plavšić, when she came out of prison, she said, okay, I lied to the tribunal when I said I'm sorry for what we did. So there is this kind of, this mood of denying, because what was done is so terrible if you start to say, yes, we did that, and it was wrong. This takes a lot of courage to do that. There were some Bosnian Serb officers who did that. I remember one, his name is Obrenović. He was the deputy commander of the Svornik Brigade, in whose area there were all these killings after the 11th of July. And he said, we did that, and the shame is so big. And he was instantly removed by the others who were indicted with him. There was no connection anymore between him and them, and then they separated his trial from the other ones. It's very hard to give in, and
I mean, but how many years? Yeah. How many years? I mean, 25 years have passed since the end of the Bosnian War, and we still talk about war as if it ended yesterday. We still dig up mass graves. How did it look like in Germany 25 years after the end of World War II? I mean, was World War II as present in German society as the Bosnian War is in our society here?
In 1917, not at all.
Why?
Because we had a so-called economic miracle, which was paid for by the United States. With external money, we had economic development after the war, beginning in the 50s and culminating in the 60s and 70s, which was unbelievable. You know, this was a country in ruins, Germany, after the war. And there was the Cold War. There was the East and the West, and the West did everything to build up this Germany as strong as it could be as an ally for the West. So they pumped money into it. The former Yugoslavia, except for Slovenia and Croatia, which is another thing, but the former Yugoslavia was more and more forgotten. I always say the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina did not end. It was finished by external pressure from Bill Clinton and others. The Dayton Agreement was forced upon the participants. The Dayton Agreement is no solution for your wonderful country, Bosnia and Herzegovina, in no way. But the war in the mines never ended, I think. There is too much open, and there is so much guilt, and there is so much resistance to give in to the guilt, to accept the guilt, and then make the best out of it.
But how long did it take the German society to start reflecting upon the atrocities committed by the Nazi German regime, and how long did it take for the German society to begin academically studying the Holocaust and enacting laws which criminalized the denial of the Holocaust? When did this really take place in Germany?
Penalizing the denial of the Holocaust, this is a thing, if I really remember right, it's about the 80s it came, 40 years after the war. 40
years after the war.
We had, of course, killing innocent people was criminalized before. Of course, there were laws. But the laws were not used. It took up to 30 years because before the German judicial system really took up what had happened and it was very reluctant to do that, to bring these things to court. There was one international court in Nuremberg directly after the war, but then that was over, and that's it. And then it started in the 70s, and especially in the 80s, and it had to take such a long time to get all the old Nazis out of the judicial system, where they were part of after the war, still.
Now, recently there was a lot of controversy when the president of Germany decided to award Professor Gideon Grieff, an Israeli Holocaust historian, the Order of Merit of the Federal Republic of Germany. Professor Grieff has earlier made quite a number of statements which question and in certain cases deny the Srebrenica genocide. Later on, after a lot of public pressure, especially from Bosniak Muslim victim organizations, the president of Germany pulled back his decision to award Professor Grieff. Now, to what extent is the German public and the top layers of the German political establishment, to what extent are they aware of what happened to Bosniak Muslims during the 1990s?
I think they are aware. It's not a big question anymore. There was Mr. Schilling as the OHR here, and he was a very strong man in forcing German government to accept and to take action concerning the former Yugoslavia, and especially Bosnia and Herzegovina. But after he left office, after Bosnia came Kosovo, and after Kosovo came the Iraq and 9/11 and the Iraq and all that.
Afghanistan as well.
Afghanistan, of course, and no, what you just described with Mr. Grieff and this medal for him. That's not big headlines in Germany. That's probably big headlines here, I don't know. But in Germany, it's not.
Why not?
It's an internal thing. You know, the president of the Federal Republic, he had been the foreign secretary for quite a while. in the years 2005 and after. But he should know. And I wonder. In Germany, Mr. Greif was part of this so-called independent commission to look into the genocide, so-called genocide of Srebrenica. Now they brought out, I don't know how many thousand pages of a report, because I only read the
This
first...
report was commissioned by the government of the Republic of Srpska.
Yeah, of the Republic of Srpska. And the fact that this report came out, you couldn't find any news in Germany about that, because...
There was a similar backlash coming from Bosniak Muslim victims in 2019 when Peter Handke was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. Many Bosniaks felt that they had not seen an expected amount of sympathy and solidarity from the European public. I mean, just imagine the amount of backlash that would have been seen if a Holocaust denier was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. Why didn't we see a larger amount of a greater backlash from West European academic and intellectual circles?
Good question. I think there were some kind of public criticizing, public critics of this decision of the Nobel Prize Committee. Some were very loud, and but that's it, more or less. And it's hard to say. Hard to say. Handke is seen in two ways. There is Handke the writer, and he is got many prizes, awards for his writing. And there is Handke, the guy who makes political comments and strange behaviors, and also writing, as his famous writing about his journey along the rivers. And Handke is more appreciated as a writer, and the question of what he wrote about Yugoslavia and the Serbs, and being at the funeral of Slobodan Milosevic and holding there a speech, that's more something for the special interest people in the Balkans or in the former Yugoslavia than in general public.
Now, closely related to genocide denial in the Balkans is rising Islamophobia, and now Europe as a whole continent has seen a significant spike in the number of Islamophobic attacks over the last couple of years. Is this something that worries you? We see a very steady trend of rising Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and populist right-wing conservative parties gaining ever more seats in various EU parliaments. Mm-hmm. Is this all interrelated to you?
Yes, I think so. This is all part of it. It's the anti-Semitism, it's the homophobia, it's the xenophobia, which is very important in that content, and especially the xenophobia, which came out very strongly after 2015, when the huge wave of refugees from the Middle East and from Africa came into Germany, and by that this created even more xenophobia. There were many people who welcomed the refugees, but there were more people who reacted and saying, we don't want these people here, we don't want any Islamization of Germany or Central Europe or the European as a whole, which is ridiculous, of course, to speak about Islamization of Europe. This is, you know, Germany has 80...
How did refugees and migrants come to be viewed as Muslims? I mean,
many of them come from Syria, Iraq, then the bulk of them, Afghanistan. That's the bulk of the refugees who came after in 2015 and afterwards.
Right, but they are primarily refugees and migrants seeking asylum in the EU.
Yes.
But the entire discourse in the European media revolves around the fact that they are Muslims.
Yeah, yeah, because it's easier to make an anti-mood, to create an anti-mood, if you pick out something people don't know about. Well, German, French, I'm not so sure. Italian, Belgian, they don't know much about Islam and Islamic history and things, but you can create fear. And that's the interest of these people, of the right-wing parties. We have in Germany this right-wing party coming up 4 years ago into our parliament by a strong number. They lost a little bit in our last elections, but even so they are there. And they will not get away. And I think it's good that they don't go away. Because then we all know we have 10 to 15% of people in our society who are xenophobic, who are anti-Semitic, who are homophobic, and all these things. And we know that they are there.
Right. Mr. Fink, it was a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having been here and having invited me.